this podcast, we will be looking at storytellers, stories, and the reasons that oral storytelling is important in our world today. You would think with all the technology we have available that stories do not have a place anymore, but they are needed more than ever. For in storytelling is where we find truth, we find reality, and we find the heart of what it is to be human. Welcome to the heart of storytelling. My name is Alyssa Curtain, and let's go on an adventure. Welcome to this week's episode. This week we're speaking with the director of the Scottish International Storytelling Festival, Donald Smith. This is a really great interview that talks about not only his personal experience, but also his experience in being a part of the revival or the renaissance of storytelling in Scotland. There's so much to enjoy in this interview that I found it really hard to summarise. It's a great interview that ends with a lovely little story. I hope you enjoy the interview with Donald. Welcome to this week's episode. This week we're speaking with Donald Smith, who is in Scotland. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi.
I'd love to hear about your journey into storytelling, where you've been and where you've come from and what you've created in your storytelling world.
Yeah, well, it's more than a personal kind of journey. I think that the storytelling thing in Scotland goes back really to a strong sense of social and cultural value in communities across the country. And it was sort of my good fortune in a way that when I began in the 1980s, really in the early 1980s, to be interested in storytelling in Scotland as an oral tradition, there were still a lot of recognised storytellers in communities up and down the country. They were not officially recognised in a sense that they were part of the contemporary arts, or they were kind of promoted by schools or cultural institutions or anything like that. It was something that rested in local awareness. And it was just a kind of good fortune, as I say, that coincided that they were still around, and there was then a kind of generosity that they were willing to help in sort of a kind of renaissance, a sort of contemporary renaissance in storytelling.
So I imagine you're talking about people like Duncan Williamson and others in that way?
So there was a great diversity of people. This is sort of quite important. So yes, there were people like Duncan Williamson and Stanley Robertson and Sheila Stewart who came from the Scottish traveller culture. So the travellers are a distinct ethnic group in Scotland. They are not Romany gypsies, although there are some interconnections between Romany gypsies. The travellers are a distinctive group in Scotland and very strongly in Ireland. But then there were also people in working class urban communities who were recognised as tradition bearers and storytellers. And it became very important to involve them because that brought a whole different dimension. Then there were people in island communities, so in the Northern Isles of Orkney and Shetland, people like George Peterson up there, who had a long tradition of music and storytelling, Western Isles, the mainland Highlands, people like Ronnie Campbell, who was the local tradition bearer. So there was a great diversity of people, and that was part of the strength of it.
Mm. And you yourself, how did you get involved in it all?
So it was quite a simple thing in a way, really. It's sort of joining the dots. So I had taken a decision. I had switched over to focusing on working on Scottish culture, and I had studied at the School of Scottish Studies, where Hamish Henderson, an important person in all this, was one of the teachers. Although actually, at that point, I was researching early feminist writers in Scotland, including a woman called Naomi Mitchison. And yeah, but then I became aware that that kind of folk studies kind of institution, which was quite small scale but important, was recording all these older tradition bearers and putting them in archives. So, and it was sound recordings, some done out in homes and in campsites and all the rest of it. And then they were moving into video as well. And I just thought it was slightly strange that we were busy recording all these people for archives, but that meanwhile, in the contemporary world of sort of schools and art centres and museums and all the rest of it, we weren't actually inviting these people to come along and share their stories with contemporary audiences. And when I left the School of Scottish Studies and I went to work in a little theatre arts centre in Edinburgh called the Netherbow, which was later to become the Storytelling Centre, I just joined those two dots. I said, well, maybe we should see if these people would be willing to come and share their stories. And one of the earliest was Duncan Williamson. In fact, I remember, I think I was sitting in the cafe at the Netherbow. That's where all the important things happened, in the cafe. And I was chatting to some education and arts people from the local city council. And I said, we really should do something with storytelling. I said, we should have a small festival. And this woman came over from the other side of the cafe and she said, I'm sorry to interrupt. I couldn't help overhearing what you're saying. And I'm Linda Williamson and I'm married to the storyteller Duncan Williamson. And he would be delighted to come and contribute to that. And so it was born and we had a first weekend. And yeah, and it was very generous, you see. That was the whole thing. It was a generosity on the part of people for whom these were their family and community cultural traditions to be willing to step out into that wider public arena and share their stories. And of course, what happened was there was a kind of double thing that happened, and that was very important from the beginning. So people came, not in vast numbers, but significant numbers, and they loved the content of the stories. They loved this sense of a continuing tradition and all things like, connection with nature that were in these stories. So they loved all that, but they also loved the creative methodology. And they thought, I would like to do this. I would like to tell stories. And so from the very beginning, you had a sense there was this, which of course there is in all good storytelling, a breakdown of any distinction between the storyteller and the story listeners. They're all part of one happening, one event. And so from the beginning, you saw this interest, not just in listening, but in participating, in actively being part of this. And that, of course, was what sparked off a sense of a contemporary renaissance, because people who did not belong to those cultural traditions in their family or community backgrounds wanted to become involved. And so then my job, in a way, with many others, was to say, so how can we create new situations, new contexts where this thing can happen in ways that are, faithful to the inspiration of those traditions, but relevant to contemporary society and audiences. And yeah, so so schools, for example, then became a critical. But then that couldn't have worked if the older traditional storytellers weren't willing to step across and be part of it, and they were. There's a generosity in storytelling, I think. Duncan always used to say a story's a gift and it never wears out. you can keep giving it away again. It never wears out. It's never destroyed or damaged, you know. Yeah. So that was part of the spirit of the thing, if you like.
Mm. And so were you telling all this time as well as coordinating this revival?
No, no. So, I mean, I had been working in, theatre direction and production and programming and was organizing exhibitions and all kinds of things. So I never told a story publicly for at least a decade. I spent a decade listening. And yeah, and that looking back at that now, that was so fruitful a thing. I used to take the storytellers to schools, for example. I mean, we were all quite small scale. Everything was done in a shoestring. So, I was transport and organizer and whatever. And that was so interesting, you see, to watch the interaction, to see how this whole thing worked, how the kids were drawn in, how a
Mm.
relationship was established.
Mm.
Yeah, so that was a whole kind of a sort of apprenticeship, if you like. But I mean, I wasn't conscious of that. I was fascinated by how complicated the actual interaction between storyteller and listeners
Mm.
was. People, I think, have the illusion this is a simple thing. You stand up and you tell people a story. Yeah, straightforward. But it's not. It's not. And the thing's only going to work if the story is told in a way that listeners can reimagine and reconstruct in their own heads. And that brings a whole series of disciplines, of creative disciplines. And sometimes you see people have absorbed those sort of naturally by osmosis because they were brought up with it and it was part of their community tradition, like the old Highland Céilles and the Traveller tradition. Uh, but other people were discovering it. And of course, what you could see was that people began with the idea that it was a text, that you started with a text, and that what you had to do was mug up this text and then deliver it. But of course, that was just putting a barrier, a mental barrier, because you saw these people, faithfully sort of internally struggling to connect in their memory with this word for word text that they'd mugged up and completely ignoring that this thing had to be recreated in a fresh way in the moment with the listeners. So that was the fascinating thing for me. I obviously see the richness of these traditions, and that was something that interested me culturally. But to see what was involved creatively and how that was different from theatre and different from literature and had its own distinctive place. And so then, of course, connecting back to where we began with this, was to be able to make the social and cultural argument that this thing was important for Scotland,
Mm.
that this was something that Scotland had kept going in the face of official disapproval for centuries. And that therefore that, it demonstrated this was something that really mattered and it had an important creative contribution, not speaking against other art forms or cultural forms, but that it had a distinctive place and deserved to be given that place or restored, if you like, to the place that it had had in older traditional societies. Yeah, but not as a museum piece, as something that was of creative and social value and importance for now. And then, of course, but that's on to another chapter, was finding out that people in different parts of the world were going through similar experiments, similar discoveries. That was fascinating.
Mm.
But
And
we
you
start
mentioned,
in our own steam. We start in our own steam. We didn't read up on any of the other things. We were just staggering along on our own.
yeah, but if you look at Scotland now, it stands as a bit of a beacon for other storytellers across the world in terms of the revival that you've had and the things you've set up, the festival and the apprenticeship model that runs and all the other great things that are going on there.
So the key to all that really was the willingness of storytellers to work collectively to support each other. And so that was one of the earliest things we did, was form this thing, the Storytelling Forum, the Scottish Storytelling Forum. And that enabled people who were discovering storytelling, people who were working as storytellers, people who were recognized as tradition bearers, to work together and it was a very simple kind of structure and organization where we shared ideas and initiatives, and it was through the forum that the festival came to be. And we started local storytelling clubs and groups, and so there was always a debate there about what was the best thing to do about this, and how could we move forward on that, and so on and so forth. And yeah, so I think that collaborative thing, and of course there were argy bargies and egos come into play and all the rest of it. But yeah, over the long term, I just said that that was then the underlay for all these other things that happened, and I think by having that, we avoided, kind of potential mistakes, or potential kind of fallouts that could have upset the thing. Things, human beings being what they are. Yeah. So far anyway, touch wood.
Yeah.
But
So
the
over
forum, we must be. Sorry, on you go.
no, it's been 30 years, hasn't it? The 30 years it's all been revived, or
So I'm trying to think. The first little experimental festival we had was in 1988, which was just and do you know the funny thing about that was I was so unsure about whether anybody would come that we had it in a sort of smallish gallery space in the building. And also, I was kind of reluctant to put it into the theatre space. I thought that's not the best place to begin. Uh, yeah, so, but there were, there was clearly that support and response that I mentioned before. So then the first really sort of quite large scale festival took place in 1989. Yeah.
And so tell me about where it is now for people who might not know anything about the festival. Where has it, how has it grown and what's happening with it now?
So the festival happens each year in the autumn, and that's deliberate. So it's building up really towards Samhain, Halloween. And there's that interesting seasonal thing there, that's the time of year where darkness overtakes the light in the swing of the seasons. So in traditional older culture, that was the time that life moved indoors. Animals were taken into shelter, and then people had to spend a lot of time just sheltering from the cold and surviving through the winter months. So there's that kind of seasonal connection. And of course, Samhain is also the old Celtic calendar, a feast of the dead. And so there's that sense of interconnection between the generations, which so there's a kind of cultural root to that. And then so there's different aspects to the festivals spread all over Scotland. So it's got a Go Local program where so people who have storytelling groups and projects going, or if something special happening in their community, can take part in the festival, and that's very important. And also, therefore, you can see how having the storytelling forum with a network of storytellers across Scotland facilitates that. It means that all the initiatives do not have to be patched together centrally. It's happening across there. We also have a thing that's called Story Ripple, where we offer the chance for groups who perhaps have not experienced a live storytelling occasion to apply to have a free session. Not a public session necessarily, might be within their own group, their youth club or a disability centre or a particular school group. So, and that has been a very successful initiative. And then there's an international aspect to the programme, which is probably smaller than it was at one time. And that's partly to do with issues about travel and trying to be carbon. So what we tend to do is have fewer international visitors, but make more use of them. So they come and they perform at the Storytelling Centre, but then they also go out and about to take part in some of these go local events. And then there's a few regular sort of traditional features where there's the thing we call Open Hearth, and that is continuing the old Ceilidh tradition, not Ceilidh in the sense of dancing. Ceilidh's a Gaelic word that just originally meant visiting. And it just meant you would go to a house where you knew there would be some music and some stories. So that's the point of these open hearth. It's just like a few storytellers, musicians, spinning off each other, bouncing stories and ideas. So that's quite informal kind of sessions. Really works nicely. We do workshops. We do some online free streams to help access in terms of people who can't get to the, for various reasons, can't get to the live event. Yeah, and we offer, in recent years, we've also offered storytellers the opportunity, and that, because of the nature of the funding, applies to storytellers who are based in Scotland but not beyond, can put in a proposal to do a particular project or performance, and that might be related to a theme we have that year. So our theme for what we call the open call, people able to put forward projects and proposals and to get some funding to help develop their work. We had Bridges Between was the theme for that, and that was a follow-on from last year when we had The Right to Be Human, which was inspired by the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And after the COVID nightmares, when we got the full live dimension of the festival going again, our theme was Keep It Lit, which is an old Irish saying, let's keep this thing going. Yeah. So those are the different dimensions, but there's evolution and there's change and constant struggle about keeping it funded, keeping it, yeah, all of that.
So do the greater government or the funding bodies, do they appreciate the value of the art form, or is it something that you've had to work hard to get them to see?
So they do now. I think they do now, and so we have to. That's the way of these things. You're trying to get multiple support. So there's government support, and we have the Creative Scotland Arts Agency, and we have a local, council, municipality in the city of Edinburgh. So all of those, and also we get little bits of help from the Irish consulate or the Norwegian consulate or the Canadian or whoever it might be, who might give us a little bit of help in supporting some of the international guests. Yeah. But generally the it's not a battle going to see the value. The battle is that just public, across the world, sort of public funding is struggling to keep up its end alongside the kind of business empires.
Yeah, it is a bit of a challenge, I think. But it sounds like And I was there in April, and I told a story at the Waverley Bar, and was
Yeah.
fantastic. Just such a supportive place to be for storytellers. I just felt really nurtured and supported there. And I guess that's what we're trying to create here in Perth, is this same sort of
Yeah.
community-driven grassroots sort of events that celebrate stories, our stories, those of people who are descended from Scottish and
Yeah.
Irish families as well. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So you
So
said
it's
yeah.
funny that Waverley session. You see, there's a fundamental practicality about that. I mean, that was one of the earliest initiatives of the Storytelling Forum, was to set up that regular storytelling gathering. And here's the point: if there's not a regular opportunity, not just to go and listen to stories to get an idea of what's going on, but for people to have a chance to go and tell a story, who
Mm,
are developing, there, then then you've got blocks.
mm,
So you have to find channels where those things can happen, regular access to storytelling for a public, and the opportunity for people to try out their skills. And what's interesting about that as well, you see, there's another set of skills involved in all this, is hosting.
mm,
Like, because that whole thing of just trying to juggle to get a balance between what's going on and to let new people in and support regulars who, come along hoping to deliver their story, and all of that, and to keep the element of improvisation and flexibility.
mm.
Because again, see, there's this, and I'm not trying to be critical or unkind about this in any shape or form, because it's totally understandable. Just like I was describing before, the thing where people are still at the stage that they're mugging up a text. You also have this thing that people come, sometimes quite experienced storytellers, to an event or whatever, and they have predetermined, I am going to tell such and such a story. But you know what? That might be the wrong story at, at that minute, because there's this amazing kind of chemistry that goes on, where somebody sings a song or tells a story, and suddenly you think, oh, but just a minute, that absolutely connects with this. And I know that woman there would tell a great version of that story. I said, would you like to respond? Or somebody suddenly thinks, ah, wow. But so there's a kind of collective awareness,
Mm.
psychology going on there. And that's
Mm.
part of the kind of magic of it, is you don't know exactly where it's going to go. I
Yeah.
love that hosting thing. I think that's so funny. And badgering people who've arrived, they've arrived from wherever, Wisconsin or Taiwan or whatever, and they're sitting there thinking, what is this, and whatever. And it's like, what does it matter? And would you like to contribute something? I said, oh, I know we're from Taiwan. Oh, but that's fantastic. We'd love to hear something from Taiwan. And I mean, it's amazing how after a while they sort of get it, and they think, oh, right, okay. So they get up and sing a song or a
Do something.
poem or
Oh,
something.
yeah, I can definitely see how that really works. And I'm just, as an emerging teller, just starting to feel that, because I've got a show coming up. I'm like, I can prepare all these stories, but I actually don't know what story
Yeah,
I'm going to tell when I get there. It's this
yeah,
having them in me and just waiting for the inspiration or the story to
yeah.
come down. It's quite an exciting, terrifying thing all at the same time.
Well, that's right. There's this risky edge to it all, and it could fall apart or it could be magical. And yeah, so that's I think part of the whole thing. And I think that it's quite hard. So that's my feeling about it. It's quite hard to keep that openness and
Mm,
spontaneity.
mm,
I think that's a problem that, to a degree, we have had. That if a thing gets successful, and there's bigger audiences coming, and it's like a more formal cultural occasion or whatever, there is a big pressure to move towards a more structured kind of performance model. And that is perfectly acceptable for some strands, say, in our festival, but it can't become the only thing. If you don't keep up that sense of the spontaneous connection that comes from the tradition, but is also part of the contemporary magic, then I think you're in trouble. Then you're really just becoming storytelling theatre. And I mean, there's a place for storytelling theatre, again, but it can't be the only thing. That has to be nurtured and fed by a wider, more open sort of base, And part of the point about the forum and the kind of peer mentoring thing that's going on. So the apprenticeship's really a kind of peer mentoring thing, is trying to make sure that people who are getting interested in storytelling get the opportunity to experience all that. Not because that means they should all turn out being a certain type of storyteller. No, everybody is going to be their own kind of storyteller. But it has to turn out in a way that they understand these processes. Yeah. Because without that, I think they're missing the subsoil, the foundation of it all. That's what I feel about it anyway. And I suppose, you see, culturally, I mean, here we are blethering away on this, what's going to be a podcast, with no clear structure or whatever. Yesterday, I think I was saying at Scottish Book Week, and I was visiting primary schools in Lanarkshire yesterday, and the kids were doing podcasts, wanted to interview you and whatever. And what's so fantastic is that, the teachers have got them all pre-drilled, and the local library was there to do the tech side of it. I've got them all pre-drilled with, these 8 questions they're to ask. And by question 3, because I'm just getting into mode chatty, the kids, they've abandoned the set questions. And it was amazing conversation. And at what these kids, primary 6s, primary 7s, I don't know what the equivalent Australian grade is, pre-high school, they're just getting into this incredible, spontaneous to and fro. And so my point, there is a point, believe me, I'm rambling, but there's a point, is that the current media climate favors storytelling type skills. So you see, I've never been on this that, I'm against internet and we shouldn't use whatever. Of course, the live is precious and we don't want to lose that. But then it can be promoted and encouraged through all the media forms. And in fact, a lot of the philosophy of storytelling and the creativity animates some of what's going on in creative media.
Yeah.
I think. Well, you have your own thoughts about that.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I've talked to lots of people about this, about how the power of storytelling could be it can be empowering, but also can be disempowering, can be used for political means, could be used to sell things, it can be used in lots of different ways. So one of the things that I was wondering was choice of venue. Do you spend a lot of time figuring out the right sort of venue to go into?
Yeah, so that was obviously the main mission and passion behind creating a purpose-built storytelling centre. So that didn't come first. In fact, for a long time, that would seem sort of against the basic principle, have storyteller will travel. But we came to realize that there was benefit, first of all, of course, in having a place where people could say, oh, so that's the storytelling centre. If I want to find out about this, I contact them, I go there. But the other thing was to design a set of spaces that would facilitate these different kind of aspects and styles of storytelling that we were keen to keep going. So,
Mm.
a kind of informal library space, an open, and you've visited and you've seen a sort of open floor type space where you could have all sorts of different activities going on. A little auditorium just for 100 people that was absolutely designed to facilitate spoken voice and visual engagement. So because I think it is very easy to get shoved into unsympathetic spaces. And that's when, for instance, in the festival Go Local, it's so important that local storytellers are involved in it because then they know which of the places can work
Mm.
well and which are not,
Mm.
Um, yeah, so that's an important aspect. You don't
Mm.
want some absolute divide between storyteller and participants,
Mm.
listeners. You have to be participants to make this thing work. Yeah.
Mm. So what are the key, like when you're looking at venues and stuff, what are the key things you think we need to look out for?
So I think it's good that there can be eye contact between the storyteller and all the listeners. I think that's almost critical. So because if you can't establish eye contact um across the piece, then the potential for interaction is hugely reduced. I think
Mm.
that's the biggest thing. And obviously, it's nice if you can have a circumstance where you can space out, say, if it's chairs and it's flat floor, you can space them into a kind of semicircle type
Mm.
situation rather than a square face on where there's disappearing rows going
Mm.
further and further back. Now, of
Mm.
course, there are circumstances where just you can't avoid that,
Mm.
but I mean, for example, in a community hall, if it's flexible, rather than have everybody in rows looking up to a kind of ancient Amdram stage that kind of recesses out the end, to set it up long side on
Mm.
with semicircle of chairs and use. So you're looking for that sense of a kind of focus, a
Mm.
visual hearth, an
Mm.
emotional hearth from which storytellers are engaging, and you want people to feel they're gathered round. I mean, there's
Mm.
different things. So something I maybe should have said, and because I think that's very true to many of international cultures, just makes me think about that when you're talking about venues. Um, the the storytelling tradition or inheritance in Scotland and in Celtic cultures generally is twofold. There's what you would call the hearthside tradition, the more informal, the Gaelic tradition. But there was also a big tradition of, if you like, high prestige sponsored storytelling and music with harpers and storytellers and poets that were in the pay of clan chiefs and regional lords and
Mm.
kings and all the rest of it. And that was a more formal performance orientated style. And that would happen in the feasting hall. So here's another thing. So there's two creative ways you can rework that in my thought. So one, you can go into a historic space. So one amazing storytelling festival, we went into the Great Hall in Stirling Castle, which was designed, huge feasting hall and formal hall, designed to accommodate up to 500 people, having a big, nosh. And we performed Ossian music and stories. So, a particular really old Gaelic Highland tradition of storytelling, utilizing the historic atmosphere of that place. So that was a way that people could be caught up in the atmosphere. But then another way to do it, using exactly the same stories in a completely different ambience environment, was to create a food and story occasion. where people were quite literally sitting around eating. So the storytelling court, the flat floor space at the centre I was talking about, ideal for this, where you're actually serving the food and having the music and the stories woven through that. And we've done that as an alternative to formal Burns suppers. So having these occasions with Burns stories and songs interspersed with the traditional food. And we've done it with the Aussie and Finn McCool stories very successfully. And I think that, again, when you look across different traditions, that combination of food and storytelling, creating a social, cultural kind of ambience is very powerful. It's very welcoming. And we have big social divide, poverty issues in the UK. And so sometimes food and story, the sharing of food and story is an affirmative social community bringing together thing as well, So that's funny that the same kind of idea and combination is it can be done in a very high-end formal kind of way, or relatively formal kind of way, and in a very community accessible kind of way,
Mm.
and that
Oh,
connects with seasonal festivals and occasion celebrations, Yeah.
I imagine over the time you've had lots of wonderful experiences and moments where you've just really been lit up. Have you got any examples of those?
Yeah, so I'll tell you one of those, and it follows on from what I've just been talking about occasions. So there was a year in the festival, and we were doing this thing in Scotland. They were having a year of islands, and this was all about affirming and encouraging island communities, of which we have many, many in Scotland. And I had the idea that wouldn't it be interesting if we could pair up Scottish islands with Mediterranean islands? And to bring all this together, what we would do is we would retell the story of the Odyssey. But how we would do this is that we would give every island an episode in the overall story. But we would ask them to retell that story in a way that was appropriate to the seagoing traditions of their island and the culture and traditions. And then, mad as a hatter, we would get all these people together. So I think we had 7 Scottish islands and 6 Mediterranean, or maybe it was 7 Mediterranean, 9 Scottish. I can't remember now. It was a lot. And we brought them all together at the festival in Edinburgh. And I thought, this needs a bigger space. And so we went to the headquarters of the Edinburgh International Festival at the top of the Royal Mile, this beautiful kind of Gothic revival space, and with some music continuity and absolutely zilch rehearsal, right? Zilch rehearsal, because it was impossible, because all these people were coming from Malta. And of course, we even had people coming from Odysseus's home island. So they all came and they each told their episode, and it was absolutely amazing. It went on for an afternoon and then a whole evening. But here's the moment. So you're taking this big epic story, right? And there's this particular moment in the Odyssey where Odysseus has been shipwrecked, right? And he's on the island of the Phaeacians. And I can't even remember now. We could have been in Crete. It could have been Crete. We could have been in Orkney. It didn't matter. He was welcomed there, taken to the ruler's palace, but he was not pressed to reveal his identity. He had not revealed his identity. And after the feasting in the hall, just like I've described in a kind of, big, quite formal environment, the storyteller was brought in. He was a harper and storyteller, playing the lute, the clarsach, as we would say in Scotland. And this guy begins to tell the story of the Trojan Wars and, the flight of Helen and the attack on Troy and the fall of Troy and all this stuff, sort of epic style. And then he gets to the bit, and now I'm going to tell you about the wanderings of Odysseus as he struggles to return home. And at that point, Odysseus gets up and says, no, he said, wait, I'm Odysseus. This is my story, and I must tell it. And he comes forward and tells the story. Now, you see, for me, that was a kind of sort of transformative moment. It was a transformative moment in the telling of that tale because suddenly the epic was personal. It was a real person's experience of suffering and struggle and all the rest of it. And of course, that individual experience then provided the catalyst and energy for the resolution of the whole tale with the return to Ithaca and the attack on the suitors and all the rest of it and the re-wooing of Penelope, all that wonderful stuff. But so to me, that was not just a key moment for that event and performance, but a key moment in storytelling where there is this kind of balance between what is collective and shared and what is individual and personal and lived. And at some point, those two things cross over. And it has to cross over in the experience of storytellers and audiences. So you share a traditional tale, you're sharing a tradition, yet this is also something that has to have open entry points for people's personal experiences now. And of course, they do, and they are. But the power of the art form is in those moments. That's what drives it. The combination that there's something inherited and collective with something that is personally relevant and powerful and meaningful to me or you or whoever it might be. So there was that Odyssey moment, and I wrote about that quite a bit through sort of saying Europe on the threshold of storytelling, and that's where we could see a connection where contemporary storytelling coming out of something that was so fundamental and rooted in older European culture. So, sorry, a long description, but that was one of those
No.
light bulb
Oh,
moments.
no,
Yeah.
it's a beautiful. I could see it all in my head. It was just beautiful. I suppose the title of this podcast is called The Heart of Storytelling, and we've touched on a number of things. But what do you think is at the heart of the oral tradition?
So I think there's generosity. I think that I mentioned that before. Sharing a story is gifting, and my God, do we need a, a culture of gifting? Because the dominant culture uh, is about taking. That's what's going on. And you can actually have real storytelling connection without emotional connection and generosity. So I think that's at the heart of it. And the medium, if you like, the medium of oral storytelling in its creative methodologies is all there to serve that. There can't be storytelling if there's not a shared experience. Somebody up there telling a story is not storytelling. That's somebody spouting up there. Storytelling has to be the shared experience. Therefore, I think it requires a sense of emotional connection and generosity alongside the imagination. And I think that's probably what makes it culturally relevant and important and eloquent in the global situation today. Yeah.
Which was my second question. So do you have, I mean, you've obviously seen a lot of storytellers, you've worked with a lot of storytellers and also built up this amazing community. Do you have any advice for either individual tellers or for people who wanted to build a community like you and your team, the people that we've worked with have?
So I mean, work with others. That's the key thing. So I just like to have to demur at the idea that I did this or
Mm,
I did that. There was always a we.
mm,
We did this. We did that.
mm,
And I suppose sometimes my contribution has been kind of helping bring people together, helping come to that point that they can see, but we have a common purpose, we have a common interest here,
mm,
we have a common opportunity. And if you connect that with the sense of global philosophy, how we're struggling. So this is a kind of cultural ecology, a human ecology, alongside the struggle we have for the natural ecology of the world.
mm,
And there can only be a we there. The only sustainable thing is a community of shared interest and purpose, which includes the natural world as well as us as human beings. And that, of course, is something that's so deeply rooted in the traditions that, it's kind of like screaming out to be articulated and shared. So it's all in that we. There's an interesting little I tell you, there's a tiny wee short story. But I love this. So uh we still have we're lucky in that in Scotland, old kind of pilgrim routes and trails that were important in older cultural times and have some ways been revived. And there's a wee story, David Campbell, who's a wonderful kind of grandfather of the whole storytelling thing here. He always told this wee story, and I remember we told it on the day that the Storytelling Centre opened. So the great St. Columba, Colum Keela, is on one of his journeys because everybody goes on about Columba and Iona, but of course he spent his whole time journeying across Scotland. So he's doing the journey up the Great Glen towards the east coast, Inverness and Murrayfirth and all that. And he's plodding along the side of all these great big long lochs where he hears this kind of whoosh, whoosh, whoosh up ahead. And he thinks, what on earth's that? And a whoosh, whoosh. And so he turns the corner of the path just round a wee bluff on the edge of the loch. And here's this wee squirrel. And he's sitting backwards, little red squirrel, the special little squirrels we have in the Highlands. And he's sitting with his back turned and he's swishing his tail into the water. And it's his tail going down, whoosh, and throwing some of the water up onto the path. And Columbus says to him, what are you doing? And the squirrel says, oh, I'm trying to empty the loch. Columbus says, you never emptied the loch. That's impossible. What a stupid squirrel. What on earth are you doing? I desist to stop that. I'm a very wise man. You can't possibly, you're never going to get there. Oh, said the squirrel. Oh, sorry. Okay. And Columba walks on and he goes round the corner of this little bluff on the side of the loch. And he's not gone more than 5 or 10 paces when he hears swish, swish, swish coming behind him. And it's, what is that? So he turns and goes back, and here's the squirrel at the same thing. In goes the tail, wish up the drops of water onto the back. I thought I told you, said Clumber. And you can't possibly empty the loch. No, that's true, said the squirrel, but I can make it easier for the next person.
mm. That is a wonderful story. Thank you. Wonderful story.
There's a wee illumination there. So sometimes, the parts that we play, and I think this is storytelling, we do have wonderful storytelling stars. We do, it's a marvelous talent. And one of the exciting things we've seen, a new generations of people coming in and, developing a storyteller. Fantastic. But, it's it's a lot of the little squirrels that just keep swishing their tails that actually makes the thing work and gives it its power, you know. I meant to tell the kids that story yesterday on the podcast, but I didn't have time because they were off in so many incredible directions that we just went with it. And any idea? So that story was in my mind. Sorry,
No,
it's
no,
landed
it's
on this podcast
no,
when it
there you
was
go. Well,
supposed to be in the Lanarkshire
yeah.
schools yesterday.
It'll get where it needs to go. But that is so true. I really want to thank you for your time and your wisdom today. I've learned a lot, and it's been really great to learn more about storytelling in Scotland. How can people find you and also find out about Scottish things?
So, Scottish Storytelling Centre has a great website, and you'll see a section on it devoted to Scottish Storytelling Forum. And under the forum section, they have a directory of storytellers in different parts of Scotland, and you can get their details and their contact information there. And I'm like everyone else, I'm just on that. And yeah, and you get a sense of the sort of flow of events, storytelling stuff, and other art forms that are doing stuff in the Storytelling Centre, and you get information about the network and different projects going on across Scotland. You can sign up, get a regular newsletter thing around that, no cost involved in that, and yeah, and keep in touch, and obviously be focused on doing all the creative and exciting things you can do with storytelling in Australia, and not least in Western Australia. I think Perth's a good locale to be working from. Yeah.
It is. It's beautiful weather here. I just want to thank you for the podcast, and we look forward to seeing more about Scotland's things in the future.
No problem. Lovely to talk with you, and lovely to talk with everyone else who will be listening in due course. Thanks very much, Alyssa.
If you've enjoyed the podcast and would like to support me to continue the work that I'm doing, please head to buymeacoffee.com/Alyssa Curtain and make a donation or sign up for a subscription. This is a passion project, and as such, it is voluntary. So your donations make it easier for me to continue this work. Thank you for your support. Well, that's our episode for today. I hope you've enjoyed learning about storytelling and folktale, fairytale, myth, legend, or personal tales, wonder tales, all sorts of stories, and the art of storytelling, and why we really need to continue using it today. You can find more information about me at alyssacurtain.com or at Alyssa Curtain Stories on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. I hope that you can find your heart in storytelling.